Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? No names, just yes or no.
They said I was too emotionally draining to invite for Christmas. Those were the exact words I read on my phone, lit up against the darkness of my living room, while the snow outside pressed softly against the window. Funny thing was, I had just spent the last hour paying off my sister's overdue car insurance, the same sister who apparently found my presence unbearable. I sat there for a moment, staring at that phrase like it was written in another language, wondering when caring too much had turned into a liability. It wasn't just a message. It was a verdict. And the part that stung most wasn't that they said it, it was how easily they all agreed. For years, I had been the one who kept everything running smoothly behind the scenes. When the washing machine broke, I paid for the repairman. When Mom's prescription wasn't covered, I called the pharmacy and handled the paperwork. When my brother's teenage daughter needed braces, guess who wrote the check? Somewhere along the way, I became less of a person and more of a safety net, a system everyone depended on but no one really saw. I used to tell myself that family meant stepping up without being asked, but lately, it had begun to feel more like stepping into a hole I couldn't climb out of. Lindsay, my younger sister, had always been the star. She was charming in that careless way that people forgive too easily, the kind of person who could break something and make you feel bad for noticing. Growing up, I envied her ease with the world. She could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with friends. I, on the other hand, would be the one offering to clean up after everyone left. Somewhere in adulthood, that dynamic just stuck. She'd get into trouble, I'd clean it up. She'd forget to pay a bill, I'd transfer the money. She'd get a promotion, I'd send flowers. It was an endless rhythm of giving and forgetting, me giving, her forgetting. Last year, when Dad passed away, that imbalance became permanent. I handled everything, the funeral arrangements, the estate, even the leftover medical bills that no one wanted to touch. I thought maybe, finally, they'd see me as more than the reliable one. Instead, the gratitude lasted about as long as the casserole leftovers. Within weeks, Lindsay was back to her usual requests. Can you cover this month's rent just until the new job starts? Or could you add me to your insurance? It's just temporary. It wasn't temporary. Nothing ever was with her. But I kept saying yes, because saying no meant confrontation, and confrontation in my family always ended the same way: silence. That heavy, cold kind that stretched for weeks, where everyone pretended not to notice your absence until they needed something again. So I stayed useful, thinking it would keep me close. I didn't realize it was only pushing me further away. That group chat had been created a few weeks before Christmas. I hadn't been added to it. Mom said it was just for planning, so I didn't question it. I told myself maybe they wanted to surprise me, maybe after everything, they were finally organizing something for me. The thought was ridiculous, but I clung to it anyway, because believing in small kindnesses is sometimes the only way to survive disappointment. Then, one night, a friend, one of Lindsay's coworkers who still liked me, accidentally forwarded a screenshot meant for someone else. It was there in plain text. Lindsay, I love her, but honestly, she's too emotionally draining to have around this year. Every conversation turns into a therapy session. My brother, let's just keep things peaceful. Mom, the thumbs up emoji, the quietest betrayal of them all. I reread it so many times that I could hear the rhythm of it in my head. Emotionally draining. As if empathy were a disease they might catch. I didn't cry, not at first. I laughed, that low, hollow kind of laugh that only comes when you realize you've been the punchline in a story you thought you were writing. I thought about all the holidays I'd paid for. The decorations, the catering, even the little Santa costume for my niece's dog. I had funded their memories, and somehow still ended up being the burden. I didn't respond. Not to the message, not to the group chat, not to any of them. I just closed my laptop and sat in silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the house that still depended on me. Somewhere deep down, beneath the hurt, there was a small, steady pulse of clarity. For once, I wasn't angry. I was just done. The next morning, I made coffee like nothing had happened. I went through my emails, balanced my accounts, checked in on a client call, and then, quietly, I opened another window, my insurance dashboard. I scrolled through the list of dependents and paused when I saw her name. Lindsay Coleman. Under family member, sibling. Covered since 2018. I hovered over the small gray button that said remove. My hand trembled just a little, not from guilt, but from disbelief that it had taken me this long to even consider pressing it. I didn't click it yet. Not that day. I just sat back, sipping my coffee, letting the warmth linger as my mind replayed that single sentence. Too emotionally draining. If that was how they saw me, maybe it was time I showed them what it really looked like when I stopped carrying the weight. They wanted peace? Fine. I'd give them silence, the kind that couldn't be ignored, the kind that didn't come with a monthly payment attached. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world looked calm, untouched, like it had just been wiped clean. And maybe that's what I wanted too, a clean slate. Something inside me shifted that morning, quiet but irreversible, like a door clicking shut. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last Christmas they'd ever spent thinking I'd show up no matter how they treated me. The countdown to my disappearance had already begun. I told myself I would not let one screenshot define me, yet the phrase clung to the inside of my skull like a sticky note I could not scrape off, so as I walked through my week pretending nothing had shifted, filing client reports and answering polite emails and making small talk about the weather with the barista, who always slipped an extra splash of oat milk into my cup, I felt the familiar tug of old habits asking me to rationalize their behavior one more time, to excuse their cruelty as stress or holiday pressure or the kind of lazy family shorthand that hardens into labels when no one bothers to correct it, and while that voice tried to keep me obedient, another voice, a steadier, drier voice I had ignored for years, suggested that perhaps I had trained them to believe I could be itemized like a utility, a service they could pause when inconvenient and reinstall when necessary. The next evening, I opened the box of Christmas ornaments I had told myself I would not unpack this year, partly because it seemed ridiculous to decorate a house where the only person who would appreciate the effort was me, and partly because every glass bulb reminded me of a holiday I had subsidized, from the year I covered the florist after the delivery driver got lost and Mom's centerpiece arrived crushed and damp, to the year I booked the last-minute caterer because Lindsay's oven died the night before, to the year I bought my niece a laptop in a color she specifically wanted because my brother said money was tight, but she was applying to colleges and needed something reliable. And while I hung a string of lights along the window, I caught sight of my reflection, not tragic, not angry, just tired in a way that felt bone deep, and I laughed, because even my face looked like it had a budget line. I did not confront anyone, not because I was scared, though I will admit that the thought of another circular family debate where Lindsay monopolized the call, Mom tried to smooth the edges, and my brother suggested we table things until after the holidays made my stomach pinch, but because there is a kind of power in staying quiet long enough to measure what you intend to do and then doing it without fanfare, and I wanted to feel that power at least once before the year ended. So I ran a private inventory, not of my worth, I am done auditing myself like a failed project, but of the practical structures I had built around them, all the invisible plumbing that carried money and access and convenience into their lives. The insurance portal where my name unlocked coverage that had nothing to do with my health, the tuition autopay I had set up when Lindsay promised to finish her degree after changing majors for the third time, the joint card I had created to calm Mom's nerves about prescription costs after Dad died, the family phone plan I put everyone on because group discounts felt like love wearing a spreadsheet. And as I traced each pipe back to its valve, I felt the kind of patience a mechanic must feel when she recognizes the one bolt that needs a quarter turn to change the sound of the whole engine. There is a myth that women like me love control for its own sake, when in fact what we love is relief. The quiet that comes when problems are handled and people stop panicking and phones stop buzzing at midnight. But if relief is never followed by respect, it curdles into resentment, and I realized mine had been aging in a dark cellar for years, which is probably why it tasted so strong the moment I let myself sip it. I rehearsed nothing dramatic, no cinematic speech where I listed my sacrifices like a prosecutor stacking evidence, because those speeches are for people who want apologies, and I did not want an apology. I wanted an adjustment in the physics of our family that could only be achieved by removing the gravitational field I had been providing. So late on a Sunday night when the world felt hushed and my nerves had settled into a clear, useful focus, I logged into the insurance account and took a breath I tried to make ordinary, the kind you release when you finally decide to stop pretending you are fine, and I navigated to the dependents page where Lindsay's name sat so casually beneath mine, as if our arrangement were a natural law rather than a favor extended past all reason. I read the confirmation prompt twice, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to mark the before and after in my mind, the exact point where I chose myself without a committee vote. And then I clicked remove and watched the status update spin as if the system itself were surprised. And I will admit I felt a flash of wicked humor as I pictured the moment she would hand over her card at the clinic for a routine appointment and the receptionist would tilt her head, call the back office, and return with that specific polite tone that means the computer says no, because while I do not enjoy petty scenes, I have learned that natural consequences arrive on their own schedule, and I do not need to escort them. After the insurance, I checked the tuition portal whose password I knew better than my own, saw the next payment date glowing serenely like a night light for an adult who should not need one, and I toggled off the autopay with emotion so small it barely registered as action, yet the room felt different immediately, as if some hum I had long learned to ignore had finally ceased. Then I set a reminder to send a single concise email in the morning to the bursar's office, a note without drama that simply stated a third-party payment arrangement had concluded effective immediately, and as I drafted it I could hear Lindsay's voice from last summer calling me her safety net with a laugh, like it was a cute nickname rather than a confession of dependence. And I thought, not unkindly, that she was about to discover how to bounce on her own. I moved through the rest of the list with the methodical calm of someone packing a life into labeled boxes, closing the shared card Mom used for prescriptions and copying down a short script I would practice in front of the mirror because I wanted my voice steady when she inevitably called, something like, "I love you and I will always care." But I cannot play both daughter and provider without burning down the daughter part, and while the words looked harsh on paper they felt honest in my throat, which is a kind of mercy we rarely extend to ourselves. When I finally closed the laptop, the house was quiet enough to hear the wind lean against the siding, and I stood there in the glow of the window lights thinking how strange it is that decisive moments seldom come with fanfare. They feel like folding laundry, like rinsing a cup, like turning off a small switch that illuminates a stadium you can no longer afford to keep lit, and I smiled, not the brittle smile I wear for other people, but the tired, relieved one you give yourself when you choose to stop begging for a seat at a table you have been setting and clearing for years. My phone buzzed on the counter with a notification from the family chat I am not in, forwarded again by the same coworker who apparently cannot resist lobbing tiny comets of truth into my orbit, and the message was Lindsay's. All caps and exclamation marks about a clinic error and how ridiculous it is when systems fail right before the holidays, with a half joke about how she always has to handle everything because people are so unreliable. And I stared at that last sentence until the words blurred a little, because apparently irony still has a sense of humor. Then I put the phone face down and let the silence settle back over me like a warm coat, and in that quiet, with the taste of my decision still new in my mouth, I opened my banking app, scrolled to the final line item that tied me to their peace of mind, and placed my finger over the toggle, ready to end the last automatic payment that had kept their world soft while mine went threadbare, when the screen lit with Mom's name. And a message preview that read, "Honey, something strange is happening with the prescriptions. Call me as soon as you see this, please. I'm getting nervous," and I watched the call icon bloom beneath her text, hesitated just long enough to hear my heartbeat in my ears, and did not pick up. By the time dawn lifted the street into that pale winter glow that makes even the trash cans look ceremonial, I had already drafted 3 emails, 2 cancellation notices, and 1 carefully worded statement that sounded like an apology until you read the second sentence, because I understood that the cleanest way to end a role you were never hired for is to write your own resignation and file it where no one can unfile it. So I started with the smallest hinge and turned it with deliberate care. knowing the door it controlled had been creaking for years and would finally swing shut once I stopped leaning against it to keep everyone warm. The pharmacy account went first, not because I wanted to punish my mother, but because I could no longer live with the quiet dread of the mid-month charge that arrived like clockwork and felt less like care than like conscription. So I called the insurer and removed the authorized card. Then I called the pharmacy and asked them to switch the notifications to Mom's number, and when the technician asked whether I was sure, her voice carrying that soft concern reserved for daughters who manage everything, I said I was very sure. Then I sent Mom a long text that did not accuse or explain so much as it laid out instructions with the calm precision of a recipe. Here is the list of discount programs. Here is how you ask the pharmacist to run a lower-cost alternative. Here is what to say if the system insists the copay cannot be changed. And I ended with a line that felt like balancing on a rail over water. I love you, and I cannot keep doing this alone. Next, I opened the phone plan portal whose interface I knew better than the faces of my neighbors, and I studied the neat row of lines like a family portrait in grayscale, my number anchoring the left, followed by Mom's, followed by my brother's, and then the final glittering problem, Lindsay, sitting there with her premium device installment, her insurance rider for accidental damage, her streaming bundle that she swore she paid me back for every month in a transfer that never arrived, and, because I am not cruel, I did not cut her off mid-billing cycle. I scheduled her removal for the end of the current period and set the system to send an automatic text with a tidy summary of how to port her number to a plan of her choosing. A message so polite it could have passed for customer service if not for the signature that carried my name, and while I clicked through the confirmations I remembered the night she begged me to add her, just for a few months, while she stabilized after switching jobs, that phrase that had become our family's magic trick, just for a few months, cloaking the years underneath like a velvet curtain. I dug out the folder in my desk where the ink on Lindsay's tuition arrangement had long since dried into something like guilt, the login sheet scrawled with password versions that tracked every birthday and dog name and favorite band she cycled through. And I printed the bursar letter I had drafted the night before, its second paragraph politely invoking a section of policy about third-party terminations, its final line confirming the date when responsibility would revert to the student of record, and I addressed it to the office and another copy to her apartment, because I have learned that paper has a way of cutting through denial that email cannot manage. Then I walked the letters to the corner box and slid them into the dark where they made the small metallic sound that tells you the thing is truly out of your hands. The joint emergency card I kept for my brother went next, the one we created after Dad's hospital visit, so he could get gas for all those trips to help Mom without me worrying whether he would overdraft. A card that had turned into concert tickets and last-minute dinners he promised he would reconcile and sometimes even did, so I logged in, downloaded the last 6 months, highlighted the medical and grocery charges in one color and the rest in another, and attached the file to a note that said, "Going forward, I am closing this account. Here is the balance, and here is what belonged to emergencies and what did not. Please settle the total by the end of the month," and, because I wanted to avoid the usual evasion, I turned off the tap before the conversation started. By late morning, the house felt different, less like a control room and more like a space where a person lived, because the constant invisible hum of pending obligations had thinned, and for the first time in a long time I could hear my own mind, which sounded a little like relief and a little like appetite, so I made a real breakfast and let myself enjoy the smell of toast without imagining a late fee coming due. Then I sat back down and did the thing I had been avoiding since I first saw the screenshot, the action whose simplicity made it dangerous and whose finality made it kind. I composed one email to all of them with a subject that could have been an olive branch if not for the truth inside: administrative changes. And in the body, I wrote a single thick paragraph that refused drama and offered clarity. I am stepping back from all financial and logistical roles I have been fulfilling, effective immediately. This includes insurance, tuition arrangements, phone plan, emergency cards, and any recurring auto payments in my name. You are adults and capable of managing your obligations. I wish you a peaceful holiday season, and I am taking some time offline to rest. I did not add explanations or itemized grievances or a ledger of favors, because those belonged to a past where I kept asking for recognition and received entitlement instead. So I sent the message to their inboxes and then moved to the second part of my plan, the part that made the first irreversible. I opened my phone, scrolled to each of their names, and tapped block with the same calm with which I have paid their bills for years. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation, because I know the cycle too well, and I did not want to be talked out of my own life by a chorus that has always sung the same refrain. The responses began to flare on my laptop before the blocks took effect, quick and incredulous and already bargaining. Lindsay claiming she had been misquoted and that she only meant I should rest. Mom asking if I was angry or ill or in need of a good long talk. My brother playing mediator with a suggestion that we table everything until next week, which is the calendar's way of burying women, and I watched the first few lines pass like weather while my index finger hovered over the shutdown icon. Then a new sender popped to the top of the queue, a name I did not recognize with a university domain and a subject line written in that bloodless administrative tone that makes adults feel like children. Urgent account question regarding tuition sponsorship, and even though I knew exactly what it would say, my stomach tightened because seeing consequences grow teeth is different from imagining them. So I clicked, read the brief request that I contact their office, and closed it again. Without answering, which was the first time in my life I let an institutional crisis that was not mine remain exactly that, and as the screen dimmed and reflected the faint outline of my face, the doorbell rang in a long, insistent press. A sound like someone who believes doors open out of habit, and I stood in the hallway with my hand on the knob and did not move. The doorbell's long, insistent press kept vibrating through the wood like a reminder that some people think access is a birthright, and I stood on the other side of it counting my breaths until the sound stopped. Then waited 2 more breaths, because old habits die slower than any love. And when I finally peeked through the side light, I caught the retreating outline of my brother with his hands jammed into his coat pockets the way he does when he plans to start a conversation by blaming the weather, a tactic that usually softens me up before the real ask arrives. Yet this time he only left a folded note wedged between the wreath and the latch that said we should hit pause until after the holidays, which, translated from family, means let the women carry the discomfort while the rest of us enjoy pie. And I slid the note into a drawer with expired coupons because I did not want to hold it any closer to anything living. Within a few hours, the social media fog began to roll in, those vague posts people use when they want sympathy without accountability. Lindsay uploading a story about system glitches at a clinic with a boomerang of her eyes rolling, captioned with a wink that suggested the universe had picked her personally for a little seasonal mischief. My mother posting a photo of a tangled string of lights and a caption about how some years you have to be the strong one even when your heart is tired. Which was almost funny given her heart generally reserved its fatigue for moments when my hands were already full, and tucked between those was a bright, chirpy college account reminder sent to my inbox by algorithm. A cheerful nudge about payment deadlines written as if the calendar itself were my accountability partner, and I let it sit unopened like a snow globe I refuse to shake. Consequences have a way of arriving in a logical order, like a montage someone edited out of sequence, so the first real crack I heard came not from Lindsay, but from the university's financial services office. A voicemail in that careful administrative tone that wraps bad news in bubble wrap, notifying me that the sponsorship had been removed and that the student would be contacted regarding alternatives. A message that took exactly 20 seconds to append a narrative I had carried for years, in which I alone stood between her and ruin, because the truth is that institutions are very good at rerouting when the preferred route closes, while families prefer to treat any closed door as betrayal. The second crack followed an hour later. Mom's pharmacy texting the full copay like a tiny alarm bell, and I could picture her hunched over the counter with her glasses slid down, whispering to the technician as if money would be quieter if you spoke softly to it, and I felt the old reflex. Reach for my wallet across a distance measured in muscle memory rather than miles, only to meet the resistance I had built the night before, a boundary that held like a well-placed brace under a sagging beam. I am not made of stone, and I will not pretend that the day felt triumphant, since there is nothing glorious about watching your family realize they have mistaken your kindness for infrastructure. Yet there was a steadiness in the discomfort I had never experienced, a sense that I could feel their frustration and still refuse to absorb it, so I turned to the smaller, pettier plumbing that fed their conveniences and closed those valves too. Because while the grand gestures make the story, the household runs on the small stuff. I removed Lindsay from my streaming family plan, the one she swore she needed for background noise while studying. Revoked my Amazon household sharing that kept her supplied with last-minute costume pieces and emergency kitchen gadgets that never returned to my kitchen. Cancelled the membership card that had let my brother buy wholesale steaks on my account for a barbecue I was not invited to but was thanked for with a photo of a grill and 8 thumbs pointing up, and each tiny click felt less like revenge and more like administrative accuracy, the way you reconcile a ledger that has been lying to your face. Around mid-afternoon the emails started to grow teeth, not vicious exactly but sharpened by panic, my brother drafting a responsible-sounding sequence about transitions and timelines, and how these changes were landing in a sensitive season. Which is another way of saying that my timing, like my feelings, should always be adjusted to match the family's appetite. Lindsay sent a voice note I did not listen to, though I could see the transcript trying to form through the little gray dots like a cartoon storm gathering courage, and when it finally spilled onto the screen it was a slurry of how could use and I never said that's, with a garnish about my tendency to make everything about me. Which made me laugh out loud because apparently funding someone else's convenience is also about me if I stop doing it. Revenge, when it is right-sized and properly chilled, does not need spectacle, so my action for the day was almost boring in its neatness. I filed a written instruction with the lender to remove my card from the automatic backup for the car insurance Lindsay had asked me to just anchor in case of hiccups, cited the exact clause that allowed revocation of a non-owner funding source, and sent a certified copy to the local agent who always addressed me as kiddo in emails, which I tolerated. Only because he moved quickly, and as I clicked submit I pictured the way a future payment would fail on a weekday morning with the sunlight falling just wrong on her dashboard, and how she would call the agency and discover that the person she labeled too emotionally draining had been absorbing the part of adulthood she found too inconvenient to budget. Evening came early as winter evenings love to do, and with it the ache behind my eyes that meant I had stared too long at screens and portals and the numeric ghosts of other people's obligations, so I closed the laptop. Made tea in the blue mug my father once sent me for tough days when you do the tough things, and stood at the sink long enough to feel my feet again, when the phone lit up with a new sender that reorganized my chest in one motion. An email from Mom with a subject line I could have predicted if anyone had asked me to place a bet. We need to talk about Christmas, honey. It is not what you think. And there was a preview of the first sentence telling me she had been trying to shield me from something and that she could explain everything if I would just pick up, while the cursor blinked in my draft box like a tiny metronome counting out a decision. And I set the phone face down on the counter, let the steam from the kettle fog the glass, and told myself I would read it. Once and only once in the morning, because tonight my only duty was to let the house go still without rushing in to fix the quiet. Morning arrived like a careful nurse, drawing the curtains one finger width at a time, and I made myself keep the promise I had whispered over the sink last night, which was to read my mother's email only once and then decide whether silence was still the truest language I possessed. So I sat at the table with a mug that had gone cold too quickly and opened the message whose subject line had already tried to bargain with me in my sleep, and the first paragraph stumbled out in a rhythm I recognized from childhood, that breathless blend of justification and tenderness that mothers deploy when they want to spare themselves the sound of their own complicity. She wrote that Christmas planning had gotten messy, that everyone had been on edge, that she had not meant to exclude me so much as to spare me, and I paused there because it struck me that sparing a person by erasing them is simply cruelty with a ribbon on it. She continued in slow, excruciating swells, confessing that Lindsay had been coming apart in small, glamorous ways no one saw, a scholarship lost in the spring for reasons that were not entirely academic, A job change that sounded triumphant on social media but left her with hours that did not pay what she claimed. A boyfriend who had charmed the family and then quietly asked my mother whether I might dial down the intensity because it made gatherings tense, which Mom admitted she took as a hint to keep the peace by trimming the room into a shape that did not include me. And as I read the careful apology shrugging under those explanations, I realized that they had all been bribed by a counterfeit calm, willing to trade the one person who kept the machinery running for the illusion of a holiday without sharp edges. She wrote that my silence had frightened her in a way no shouting ever could, that the pharmacy had looked at her like a stranger when she asked for the discounted rate, and the handset felt heavy in her hand when it would not connect to me. And then, as if some levee inside her had finally failed, she told me she had cried in the grocery store because the total at the register looked like a dare, and she did not know whom to call to make the dare go away. And she asked me, not ordered, not demanded, but asked in a voice that remembered lullabies, whether we could speak before Christmas so she could make this right. A phrase that lay on the screen like a bridge that wanted to believe in itself, even as the river below it ran wild. I took a long time before letting my fingers touch the keys, because the impulse to rescue is not a reflex you simply switch off once you understand it. It is a muscle that throbs louder when you tell it to rest. And I had to separate the trembling in my hands from the truth in my chest, which was that forgiveness and service are not the same thing, and I can forgive a person without re-entering the role that allowed them to ignore the cost of their comfort. I thought about the years I had pulled levers and pressed buttons to keep their world orderly, and I tried to picture a version of love that did not require me to become machinery, and for the first time that picture did not look selfish, it looked accurate, like a map finally matching the streets beneath it. I wrote back to my mother a paragraph that felt like an animal stepping into a clearing, wary and visible. I told her I had read her message, and that I believed she was sorry in the way people are sorry when they suddenly understand the shape of what they built with their fear. I told her that I loved her in the ordinary, unoperatic way adult daughters love mothers who grew smaller after their husbands died, and that I would not be coming for Christmas this year because affectionate performance is not the same as reconciliation, and because any healing worth having cannot be staged between a turkey and a trifle. I attached the list I had made yesterday, a graceful document that explained in plain terms where accounts now stood and whom to call at each office if she needed guidance, and I ended with a sentence that balanced exactly between softness and steel. I am not angry. I am choosing a different job title than the one you gave me without asking. I did not send the email, not yet, because while I waited for the kettle to sing, I opened the door to a light snow and found another envelope tucked beneath the mat, this one from the university again, not a demand but a notice. And inside it a line that surprised me by the way it did not hurt, advising that the student had options including a payment plan and temporary hold, and that advisors were available to help her navigate. Language that read like a lamp turned on in a room I had long kept lit with my own hands, and I exhaled something stale and private, because the myth that I alone prevented catastrophe had finally revealed itself as vanity wrapped in martyrdom, and I was tired of wearing both. The revenge for this final chapter was not a dramatic flourish, but a quiet commitment that would continue past the credits, a new set of rules that made me my own beneficiary. So I opened an account titled Things I Do for Myself and scheduled the transfer that, in any other December, would have flown outward to pay for someone else's grace. Then I booked a small cabin 2 hours north with a fireplace and a promise of silence. A place where I could practice a holiday that did not require performance, and I smiled at how scandalous it felt to spend my resources on warmth I would actually feel on my own skin. Then I returned to the draft, read it one more time without flinching, and almost pressed send when a new email slid in above it. Not from my mother this time, but from Lindsay, a subject line that said, "Please read. I know you saw the chat, and the preview showed the first sentence. I said what I said because I wanted Mom to have one peaceful day, but also because I knew you would still cover me if I hurt you," and I stared at that single admission until the room seemed to tilt, understanding that she had not only counted on my goodness, but weaponized it, and that my refusal had startled her more than any speech could have done. I closed both messages without replying and let the draft sit like folded letters held down by a paperweight, because the truth is that endings rarely deserve trumpets and choices do not need applause to remain choices. I put on my coat and stepped out into a morning that smelled like metal and pine, locked the door behind me with the kind of care you use when you are leaving something tender inside, and as the first flakes landed on my sleeve, the phone buzzed once more with my mother's name. A new message that the preview showed only as a line of wet words: "Honey, please, call me. I am crying in the parking lot, and people are staring," which played through my chest like a chord I will probably always recognize. And I stood there long enough to feel both the pull and the boundary, then slid the phone back into my pocket without opening it, walked to the car with the measured pace of someone learning to carry her own peace, and told myself, not unkindly, that some doors are not slammed, but simply not reopened, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is leave the answer unwritten long enough for everyone to hear the echo.